Hi everybody, my name is Rhiannon and I am diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I wanted to talk about my experience with that. This video is for anybody who is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or who experiences borderline tendencies and needs to learn more about it or wants to learn more about it. It's also for friends, family members, and people who are supporting those who have borderline personality disorder. This video will probably be longer than my usual videos, and if you have any questions about all the information that I throw at you, please leave them as a comment and I will try to get back to as many of them as I can. So I was diagnosed in 2018 after my symptoms got really bad. My symptoms have always been a part of my life, but I didn't realize that they were symptoms of borderline personality disorder, and they got significantly worse after I moved across the country and got into a relationship and was put in a situation where there were more stressors in my life. Before 2018, when I got diagnosed, I was in therapy for depression and anxiety symptoms, and I did not feel that it was helping. I also struggled with symptoms of depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation until 2016, when I actually started seeking out professional help. Even though I was only diagnosed 2 years ago, I feel that I have shown symptoms since I was about 13 years old. While I believe I had symptoms at a very early age, it's important to note that children under 18 cannot and should not be diagnosed with personality disorders. So my childhood experience involved a lot of impulsivity, unstable relationships and friendships, and rapidly changing mood swings, some that you might see in a typical teenager. And it's also when I began experiencing what I would call visual distortions, which I'll get into later. My impulsivity played a part in drinking underage, making decisions that could hurt me as a child, and did get me into dangerous situations, which led to trauma. It also created a reputation for me as a teenager that I struggled to cope with. Growing up, I gravitated towards friendships in a way that, looking back, were unhealthy, but could be seen as typical teenager behavior. So I bounced around from friend groups. I bounced around calling this person my best friend and then this person my best friend, and then cutting people out of my life pretty drastically. I also think that my sense of identity was lacking, which followed me into adulthood, so it made creating actual bonds with friends and family and romantic relationships really hard. Anxiety and panic attacks became a pretty big part of my daily life. When I turned 15, I experienced my first panic attack. Was fortunate enough to have a parent who helped me through that and helped me find coping strategies to lessen that anxiety and cope through panic attacks in healthy ways. Although I had this support from afar since my parents were divorced, I still had a hard time. My anxiety often transformed into paranoia. So I would spend a lot of time trying to spy on my family members to hear if they were talking about me, and I had a really hard time trusting friends or significant others as a teenager. My paranoia played a significant role in my life for a period of time where I can't remember my age, but I do remember being afraid of being awake late at night. My fear would end up keeping me up in the middle of the night, and I would struggle with severe anxiety related to going to sleep. This paranoia about nighttime ended up coming back into my adult life as well. Heavy mood swings were a big symptom as well. It's hard to articulate what my mood swings as an adolescent were like because they felt completely normal to me. I also have a hard time pulling memories from my childhood and teenage years, which in hindsight is probably a combination of disassociation, which is a big symptom of BPD, and my brain repressing trauma. I do know that there were times where I could not control my crying or anger. My most vivid memory was after school one day where I ran around my house and no one was home, and I just threw things and knocked things on the floor because I was angry. Disassociation, depersonalization, and derealization can also be symptoms that are a part of BPD, but can also come up in other mental health issues as well. Depersonalization is a dissociative symptom that includes experiences of unreality, detachment, emotional numbing, and perceptual alterations. It also correlates with the lack of identity associated with borderline personality disorder. And derealization can include visual distortions, which I experience sometimes. My visual distortions are not hallucinations. I don't see things that aren't actually there. I'm not experiencing auditory hallucinations or having visuals come into my reality. The visuals that I already see that are reality just change. So my visual distortion started happening when my borderline episodes began, but at the time I did not realize I was experiencing episodes or symptoms. I don't call them hallucinations because they aren't something appearing in my world that isn't there, but it is when real life objects start to change. For example, faces change and markings in art or photographs move around. Sometimes the size of things change, like a person's eyes will get bigger or tiles on a floor will shrink into one another. Usually these distortions happen when I'm in fight or flight mode and feel like I'm in danger. I spent the majority of my life assuming that everyone experienced things like this and only recently spoke up to my therapist about them. My college experience is a bit of a blur, and I still had no idea that borderline personality disorder existed. I assumed I just had anxiety. Looking back, there are a few aspects of my young adult life that show signs of BPD, but I'm only basing that off of my memories and my current knowledge of BPD symptoms. I tried to start therapy in college, but I kept skipping and deciding that my therapist didn't care about me, so I didn't need to go. At this point in my life, when I was in college, I was living on my own, attending college classes, and had recently joined a sorority. And during the next 4 years, I thrived for the most part academically and started my process of obtaining my teaching license. Even in a sorority, I did have a difficult time maintaining friendships. And during my early years in college, I clung to short-term relationships and jumped around from person to person, both friendships and relationships, romantic relationships. And during my late college years, I was in a committed relationship where I struggled greatly with being able to articulate my needs, emotions, and I felt incredibly disconnected from this person. I wasn't a nice partner at the time, and I can fully admit that now. After graduation, I impulsively moved in with a casual boyfriend, only to move out on a whim a few months later. I abandoned all of my things and drove to Pennsylvania with little warning or direction. By November 2016, I had landed a full-time job in advertising and moved to Colorado, where I feel my symptoms ended up getting significantly worse. While borderline personality disorder had affected my life up until this point, I was still not actively seeking a diagnosis. I continued to treat my issues like anxiety, and once I moved from Pennsylvania to Colorado, I quickly met my current partner, Allison, who is now my fiance, and I began a full-time job with an advertising company. This major life change led to a lot of stress, and without having my usual support system so close by, I deteriorated pretty quickly. My partner dealt with the majority of my symptoms, and they intensified, specifically my paranoid idea that you're going to lose the people that you love or people are going to leave you started to really show up in my life. During this time, I became violent, delusional, and extremely aggressive. Allison and I struggled for 8 months before we were forced to split. Before we split, I was able to find a licensed social worker, and it wasn't a great experience. I ended up going to this person for professional mental health help. I was misdiagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and depression and began cognitive behavior therapy. The BPD diagnosis was brought up to me by my partner during this time, who has her master's in psychology, but couldn't ethically diagnose me. But I aggressively refuted the idea. My therapist believed I did not meet the criteria for BPD and continued cognitive behavior therapy with me, but I saw no results at all. After a few months of trying therapy, my therapist ghosted me, and I did not seek out therapy after July 2017. In late 2017 and most of 2018, I formed new friend groups and created a new life for me. I abandoned the life I had created with Allison, and I abandoned the life that I thought I created outside of Allison. I started completely fresh and decided that I needed to just completely start over. I went through ebbs and flows of depression and hypomania, drastically fluctuating. During this time, I experienced a lot of depersonalization, which I kept to myself, and eventually I abandoned those friendships as well. In October of 2018, Allison and I found our way back to each other, and it was time to choose between self-medicating or getting help and having a second shot at a healthy adult relationship. I was able to find a new therapist in November of 2018 and got the correct diagnosis, which included a lot of information on how to manage these symptoms and a recovery plan that involved being referred to a dialectical behavior therapy group. Dialectical behavior therapy lasted from April through November of 2019, and during this time, my personal life began to mellow out very slowly. A new diagnosis meant learning new ways to manage symptoms, learning how to communicate, and how to handle life on the border of psychosis. In 2019, I still did have aggressive outbursts and borderline personality disorder symptoms. For example, splitting. I split a lot. I had really angry outbursts and uncontrollable behavior, but I was not violent, and that did stop. I've been with my current therapist since November of 2018, and it's been a much better experience. She is certified in trauma and helping my specific needs. I've been successfully managing addiction issues since October 2018 and have graduated from dialectical behavior therapy. I'm currently starting EMDR therapy this month to help with trauma. My most recent episode was on Sunday. I'm not proud of that, but I like to be honest about that. And I'm also talking to my therapist about the possibility that I may have PTSD. If you're curious about what triggers borderline personality disorder or how trauma and borderline correlate, a lot of symptoms about borderline personality disorder and PTSD or trauma coexist with one another, and so it's a sweet spot of trying to figure out, do you have a personality disorder or are you experiencing some pretty bad trauma? My therapist and I have discussed this, and we are sticking with my borderline personality disorder diagnosis because it helps me have a plan and it helps me manage my symptoms, and it gives me very clear guidelines on how to improve. I wanted to make this video to talk openly about my disorder. I talk pretty openly about it on my social media platforms, but I did want to just go through the way that symptoms have shown up in my life since I was young and create an open discussion. I do follow a couple people on YouTube who have borderline personality disorder, and I'll link them below if you're looking for more resources. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Leave a comment on any topics that you would want me to cover, and I'm excited to start talking about BPD and hopefully erase some of the stigma. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in my next video.